Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure and a bit of pressure to give an overview of the challenges that face our public agencies in the natural environment domain. I seek your understanding up front that there will be some overlaps in terms of the slides you will see from what you have seen so far, because it's quite obvious that the natural as well as the built-up environments are closely interlocked, right? You have heard from our ERA colleagues and others about some of the programs that we have undertaken in the area of enhancing our urban livability. In fact, there have been various investments over the years, and later I have an overview slide on that seek to enhance the quality of life for Singaporeans, right? By maintaining our city in a very integrated manner, from urban design all the way through maintenance. Moving forward, there will be increased emphasis on achieving a very good balance across the water, energy, land, and I hope waste nexus to enhance the whole concept of resource sustainability. And that's the theme of my presentation on making towards a more sustainable Singapore through R&D. You may have heard some of these facts ahead or before, but let me just quickly do a recap to give you a sense of the key challenges that face Singapore as a country. You have heard about the energy trilemma, where we have to simultaneously look at energy security, affordability, and sustainability. Right? This is in view of the fact that our energy consumption, our demand for energy will rise by some 1.7 times come the year 2050. For water, we've pretty much achieved water self-sufficiency, but there's always the avenue to do more. Our colleagues, my colleagues at the PUB, which are all based in the same building, are looking to increase our capabilities so that we can actually cater for the greater use of desalinated water from reverse osmosis, and new water from reverse osmosis by the year 2060. This is an account of the fact that the water demand will double from 2015 numbers. In NEA, my key focus area today is on closing the waste loop, taking a leaf from our colleagues from PUB, where they have closed the water loop, so to speak. This is in view of the fact that the waste that will be generated by Singapore will rise to some 1.6 times come 2030. It's even closer than that. Today, we have one active landfill called Semakau. Some of you may have visited before. It's currently projected to fill up by 2035. Right? It is actually not that far away, and we're to make very key critical decisions as to whether there will or will not be a second landfill beyond that. Right? Later I have some slides to talk about this in more detail. My colleagues at the AVA are looking at our food sustainability. It's perhaps alarming to you that, or perhaps not surprising at all to some of you, that we import some 98% of our food. 98%, right? So that's another source of resource sustainability to tackle. For land, this is a figure that's been made public as well, where we need some 5,600 hectares of land come 2030. Right? So as you've seen from the previous 3 slides, in terms of energy, water, land, and waste treatment, these are very immense challenges, and the room for R&D is very obvious. And towards this end, the NRF and fellow agencies have undertaken various R&D programs over the last easily more than a decade, ranging from energy, we have heard of the Energy National Innovation Challenge, to land and livability, to water, and increasingly more integrated programs. Right? This will be my focus for the next few slides, where I give you some sense of the integrated R&D programs that our fellow agencies are undertaking together as a group. For example, just between the NEA, where I come from, and the PUB, our National Water Agency, we are going to build a massive next waste treatment plant. It's called the Integrated Waste Management Facility, come 2021. This will be co-located with the Tuas Water Reclamation Plant, TWRP. And it is not just about co-locating to save on basic utilities and so on, but rather we are looking to closely integrate the various feedstock and even the waste streams. For example, the sludge from the dewatering from the wastewater treatment will be co-digested with the food waste that will be treated in a conventional waste treatment plant. And in so doing, it helps in the generation of biogas. There will be also efforts to integrate the heat capture to boost both processes of waste treatment, as well as water. The search always continues for more permeable, ultra-permeable, and low-maintenance membranes, be it for desal or for new water production. Okay. This is a target that our colleagues at PUB have set out for water. Currently, we are at about 3.5 kilowatts hour per meter cube of water produced. Our target is to bring it down to less than 1. Right? And in so doing, we hope that we can achieve not just water self-sufficiency, but also the energy sustainability in serving of that. Some of these technologies will include the use of biomimicry and biomimetic membranes to aid in the process. I should stress that this figure is about the systemic overall cost. Right? Closer to home, that's what I'm working on currently. It's a program that's yet to be approved by NRF. No, this is not a pressure on them to approve. But our minister has set out clear targets for NEA that we want to close the waste loop. Today, our waste primarily is about 60% recycled. The remaining amount is sent to incineration, which is our conventional way of waste treatment. Today, it reduces the volume by some 90%, and the ash that results is then buried at Semakau landfill. The question is, can we even reuse the IBA, the incineration bottom ash that's generated, as well as burn what is currently called non-incinerable waste, or treat it in some other ways, so that they no longer had to be sent to the landfill. In the red bar is an ongoing program called Waste to Energy, the red loop. There were some slides earlier by some of our colleagues, where it's an ongoing program at NTU, where we look at increasing the efficiency of mass burn as it used today, right? Through things like oxygen-enhanced membranes, for instance. But moving forward, we are trying to look at other loops to be closed. For example, the blue loop, where we are interested in in-situ treatment technologies for waste. In particular, the pesky waste streams that are ahead of us are plastics, e-waste, and food waste. Today, food waste, thanks or no thanks to the very humble chute found in every HDB flat, is commingled with other waste streams. And you can imagine that by the time this waste is collected and sent to the incineration plant, a big part of the process is actually spent on drying it in the first place before you then start to burn it. It's a highly inefficient process, right? So we're very keen to look at specific waste stream-specific technologies that can be used or applied to things like plastics or e-waste and food in particular, so that they can be taken out from the whole system as early and as upstream as possible. So that's the blue loop. In terms of the ash that still has to result from whatever remaining amount of waste that has to be burnt, we are hoping to divert it, right? There's a blue loop, by converting the ash into useful materials and returning it as a resource back to industry. This is what we also call waste to resource. And last but not least, for some of these technologies, can they be parlayed to previously closed landfills, including those on the mainland, so that we can free up some of these previously closed landfills? This will include Lorong Halus, which is towards the northeastern part of Singapore in Tampines, where the amount of land that stands to be recovered can be as much as 400 hectares. Right. I hope you have your lunch. These are some not so appetizing things, but these are things that NEA does on a day-to-day as a course of business. Actually, when I joined, I was told there was a joke about what NEA stands for. It stands for National Environment Agency, of course, but the joke went that it stands for Nearly Everything Agency, right? Because we look at things like pest control, weather prediction, pollution control. In fact, I think the acronym is somewhat wrong. It should be Nearly Every Bad Thing Agency, right? Because over the years, we have had to face dramatic events like Zika, chikungunya, foodborne diseases, and also emerging contaminants that are found in our products and day-to-day lives. Plus, of course, to quote a very famous politician, Donald Rumsfeld, there are also many unknown unknowns ahead of us. Right? This just paves the way for so much R&D that's to be done. I had the pleasure of being in the E2S2 Steering Com Review Committee a few months back, where we looked at potentially an R&D track on emerging contaminants. Right? There's a whole series of chemicals and reagents that I think Singapore and other countries, in fact, will be interested to have a handle on. The last part of my presentation is on food. I mentioned earlier about our heavy reliance on food imports, some over 98% of it. So other than urban mining, so to speak, right, how to get resources from our waste, we are interested in urban farming. How do we increase food production productivity in Singapore, notwithstanding our very severe land shortage, right? There's interest to look at using rooftops or even the facades of buildings to not just provide green coverage, but perhaps even food sources, right? So just as we have closed the water loop and are trying to close the waste loop, perhaps there's also something to be done in terms of closing the food loop by having more self-sufficiency within our borders. Okay, this is the end of my stage setting presentation. I understand that there will be a panel that Prof. Hastings will be setting up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pang. And yes, if you could please hold your questions, he will be joining us back on stage for a panel discussion as part of this session. Now I'd like to invite up Professor Daniel Hastings. As the CEO and Director of the Singapore-MIT Alliance for Research and Technology, or SMART for short, Professor Hastings spearheads the SMART Centre's mission to undertake world-class research on specific problems of societal significance to Singapore and of interest to MIT. With over 30 years of experience in academia, Professor Hastings was MIT's Dean of Undergraduate Research from 2006 to 2013, Head of the MIT Technology and Policy Program, and Director of the MIT Engineering Systems Division. Professor Hastings was US Air Force Chief Scientist from 1997 to 1999, and the Chair of the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board from 2002 to 2005. Professor Hastings is a Fellow of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, the International Astronautical Federation, and the International Council on Systems Engineering, and a member of the US National Academy of Engineering. He served on the NASA Advisory Council, the Defense Science Board, the National Science Board, and several ad hoc committees on space technology, as well as on the science and technology management and processes. He has published over 120 papers, written a book on spacecraft environment interactions, and won 5 Best Paper Awards. His recent research is focused on complex aerospace system design. As Director of SMART, Professor Hastings oversees activities in 5 interdisciplinary research groups, conducting research and catalysing innovation in the 4 major thematic areas of CREATE. Here to moderate a multidisciplinary discussion to address how CREATE's research responds to challenges in health and environmental systems is Professor Hastings. Thank you.
So thank you very much. We having heard from Mr. Patrick Pang, we're going to now hear some of the activities that are going on in CREATE that are relevant to that area, in particular focusing on human and environmental systems. And then after a set of, an overview and a set of short presentations, we'll go to a panel discussion where we hope to actually interact with the audience. That's you. I want to put this in the context of CREATE's vision. Now, the things I'm going to say, of course, apply to all of CREATE, though when we go to the presentations afterwards, it'll be focused on human and environmental systems. But nevertheless, it's of course broader than this. So CREATE says, and it is actually doing this, we want to engage in cutting-edge research and be a leading research hub. And I believe as you hear from the research presentations, you will see that has actually been accomplished. CREATE says it wants to do things that put it in the position of thought leadership. And I think you've seen both in what we heard earlier and in some things you're about to see, that these are areas of thought leadership, for Singapore and more generally for the world. CREATE operates, as I think you can see, at a scale that both motivates the partners to participate, but a big enough scale with big enough problems that important things can actually be done here in Singapore. And attracts lots of faculty from across these institutions. The fact that so many faculty come here indicates that this particular objective of CREATE to be a second home is in the process, I would say, of being achieved. Both a second home and the deep collaborations we see with NUS, NTU, and the other Singapore universities. It is actually the case that the students and the researchers here are actually jointly supervised, and in the process, everybody is getting better. So I think this one is being accomplished. The fact that the agencies are here, you heard Mr. Pang say he participates on the oversight board for E2S2. We have people from the agencies participate with us in terms of the Smart FM program and some of the other programs. Is an indication that the Singapore agencies are turning to CREATE to find solutions to the difficult problems that they face, driven by some of the constraints, as Mr. Pang so clearly laid out. You heard some of the data this morning about the startups that have come out of CREATE. There's quite a number. Some of them are, frankly, a lot more visible than others, but nevertheless, a lot of good stuff is actually going on with regard to the startups. And finally, you heard Minister Heng this morning speak about the Global Innovation Alliance and the idea of bringing together all these partners to do something that's significant in innovation. I think this is something that will emerge as CREATE goes forward to CREATE 3.0. So now I'm going to turn and actually talk about some of the research centers that are relevant to this area of human systems, and environmental systems. And you see them actually listed here: the Smart Infectious Diseases Program, Biosystems Micromechanics, the Hebrew University Program with Singapore, the Smart Center for Environmental Sensing and Monitoring, E2S2, which is Shanghai Jiaotang, and I'll briefly mention work in Berkeley, the Berkeley program, and Singapore ETH Center. The way each of these things is actually constructed as I go through them is you'll see hopefully a smiling picture of people smiling and being happy to be here. And in each case, you'll see the institutions that are represented in terms of where all of these people are actually coming from, the partners in the Singapore government, and then the companies that have actually been born out of this set of activities that are now operating, in Singapore. So that's kind of the construct going forward. So this is the infectious diseases group in SMART. And what they do is they study mechanisms of host pathogen interactions, particularly focusing on dengue and malaria, and they've done now work on Zika, some of which goes directly to the things that Mr. Pang talked about, and then translating that into finding vaccines and diagnostic tools. This is the BioSim program, Biosystems and Micromechanics. Again, you see, all the people there where all these people come from in terms of both MIT and across Singapore, their partners and the companies that have actually been born out of this thing. And what they do is they develop new devices and tools for healthcare therapy. So microfluidic devices to sort out cancer cells come out of the blood, devices that allow you to grow the three-dimensional structure of cells so you can see the effect of cancer in a three-dimensional scaffold, fast ways to do MRIs in portable devices, things like that. This is a SHARE, the SHARE MMID program, Molecular Mechanisms of Underlying Inflammatory Diseases, and the same structure here. And they're looking at the molecular basis for understanding inflammation in a number of actual diseases, and you'll hear from Professor Razin in a few minutes. This is the Smart Sensam program with once again, all the people that they participate, the companies that have come out. And you'll hear from Professor Whittle in just a minute. They're looking at air and water quality issues, environmental sensing issues, climate change issues, and marine quality issues. The E2S2 program, who they're participating with, all the agencies they're working with, and a company that's been born out of that. You'll hear from Professor Zhang in just a minute. We're looking at urban waste and resource recovery issues and assessing some of these emerging contaminants that you heard about. And then I did briefly mention, relevant to this particular area, there's work going on in the SEC program on ecosystems in the urban landscape, and work in the Berkeley program on the building efficiency and sustainability here in the tropics. So now what we're going to do is actually hear from four of these people, and then afterwards go to the panel discussion. So first of all, let me invite up Professor Wee, who's going to talk about what's going on in the infectious diseases area.
Thanks very much, Professor Hastings. So, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've got 3 slides, and basically just to introduce to you what we've done with the Smart Infectious Disease Group, but focusing mainly on dengue, and because of constraints of time, because just to show you an example of how we could collaborate together, and tell you a story about how these 2 companies have come about. And I was going to basically take you through this map, but I think the events in the last 24 hours basically frame this context in ways that I cannot have foretold. And if you've been following the news in the last 24 hours, you've heard that Sanofi Pasteur has now made an announcement that its vaccine cannot be used in those who have never had dengue before. So it'll be protective in those who have had a prior infection, but in those who are immunologically naive, especially children, you cannot use the vaccine because it actually makes the actual infection worse. And to give you a context of this, the first effort to make a dengue vaccine actually started in the Second World War with both Albert Sabin, who actually went on to develop the polio vaccine, and Hota and colleagues in Japan, all coming together, all working on trying to develop a dengue vaccine given the ravages of what the virus can do. But the real global effort actually started in 1977 through a WHO coordinated meeting, which happened right here in Singapore, which then the meeting decided that they'll go ahead and make a dengue vaccine. And so after 40 years, today we learned that it actually doesn't work. And that really underscores that we cannot put all our eggs in one basket and hope that we have a dengue vaccine that protects against this disease. But really, we do need other ways of dealing with this. And so when SMART came and when people from MIT came and we started talking, it seems very obvious that here you have a group of scientists with a technological expertise, and those of us in Singapore who have the subject matter expertise in terms of cases and virology, that if we come together, we could actually make a big difference, right? And so how do we go about thinking about a treatment? Well, first of all, you need something to test the treatment in. And because dengue virus only infects humans, that these cause the disease that we see as dengue fever and dengue hemorrhagic fever in humans, but not any other animals, then we needed a model where we could really understand whether any therapy is going to work in humans. But before we can go into humans, we need models. And so we collaborated to then develop a humanized mouse model where it has the hematopoietic system or the blood system of humans, so that we can at least evaluate some of our candidate therapeutics in this model. At the same time, when you want to bring a therapeutic into cases, you want to know whether your treatment is going to make a difference to the cases. And if you just observe the clinical outcome, it takes a long time. And so we then started to work together to come up with biomarkers that can very early on tell us whether any therapy is going to make a difference to the disease. And then finally, we then also decided that we needed a way to make these new drugs. And so we collaborated to basically use a computational method to design an antibody that will neutralize all 4 types of dengue virus. And this work was published in Cell, that where this antibody is at now is that it's been licensed to Serum Institute of India. The plan is that they are at the various stages of production right now. The plan is that by second half of 2018, we'll go into phase 1 clinical trial. But the good thing about the offshoot of this work in the last 30 seconds or so is tell you that the offshoot of this work with dengue actually enabled us to respond to Zika. So because we've learned all the lessons that we've done here, then in September last year, we decided that maybe we need a drug against Zika. And given what we've learned about dengue, and dengue is closely related to Zika, we can do a Zika drug. So we started working on it in September last year. We filed an IND in September this year, and with a little bit of luck, we'll start clinical trial in January 2018. In 15 months, we went from nothing to having a drug that will go into humans. So we think that this convergence of technology and subject matter expertise really could allow us to do things that we could not otherwise do independently. Thank you.
Please. You'll have the chance to ask questions of Professor Wee in a few minutes. But next, Professor Zhang from Shanghai Jiao Tong.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Zhang Bo. I'm very honored to be here to introduce research work in the E2S2. E2S2 is a major collaboration between SGTU and NUS. It aims to study solutions for environment and energy in megacities. For megacities, they are facing many coupled problems. E2S2 program selected two main coupled problems. One is CSA. It is for waste management in megacities for sustainability and energy recovery. The other one is CSB, is for the emerging contaminants for environmental sustainability in megacities. So these two parts are supported by two platforms. One is SP1, the other one is SP2. SP1 is for the critical modeling and the analysis of system dynamics. SP2 is for the management and analysis for a large database. Also, we have established two test beddings in Shanghai and Singapore. And for me, I took part in the CSB sub-project. It is a major focus on the occurrence, fate, and transport, ecotoxicity, and human risk assessment of emerging contaminants. So for emerging contaminants, the U.S. Geological State has the definition, the emerging contaminants are not far away from us. It is around us in our daily life. And my research work mainly focuses on the emerging contaminants in the water environment. So emerging contaminants can enter the water cycle by many pathways, such as the wastewater treatment plant, farmland, and factory, and it would pose the potential risk on the ecological system and human being. For this part of work, I mainly cooperate with Professor Wong Chun Nam and Professor Karina Jing in NUS. In the urban water cycle, there are many cancer for emerging contaminants, including the PPCPS, EDCS, and PFCS, and so on, many kinds of emerging contaminants in the water. And for me, I focus on the nanomaterials because with the development of nanotechnology, more and more nanomaterials are being used in various fields, especially in our daily life. And for silver nanoparticles, it is most widely used nanomaterials because it's antibacterial properties. So in my research work, I determined the toxic effect of silver nanoparticles on the aquatic organism. To do this, I evaluate how increasing doses of silver nanoparticles affect the organisms at the molecular level before they cause harm to the organism or at the ecological level. And we have established a comprehensive platform and methodology to evaluate the biological effect of the emerging contaminants. And from the conventional methodology to the applications of novel method, such as the metabolomics, we are trying to get some biomarkers to discover the metabolomic response and to diagnose the early water quality risk. So that's all. Thank you.
So next, Professor Andrew Whittle from Sensam.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Oops, wrong way. That way. I was asked to talk about our program in Center of Environmental Sensing and Modeling. Sorry, is there a problem with the microphone? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. This program is also in its 10th anniversary. We started more or less the same time that CREATE did. And it's involved a large number of MIT faculty, about 15 or 16 MIT faculty, numbers from NUS and NTU and SUTD, and we've engaged rather heavily with agencies in Singapore, particularly NEA and PUB. We also found when we first arrived in Singapore that there was very little concentrated activity in environmental activities in Singapore. And so we really catalyzed a lot of activities with some of the existing groups, notably the Earth Observatory, which is out at Nanyang University, and TMSI at NUS, which is largely doing government contract research on the environment. So in my limited time here, I was just going to show you 4 snapshots of the kind of work we're doing. We take a very holistic view of environment. We deal with climate issues, we'll deal with urban issues, and we deal with marine issues. So I was just going to try and illustrate some of the work we've been doing. The first one was regional climate. Everyone talks about climate change in the global sense, but in fact you have to bring this down to a scale where it has some impact in areas such as Southeast Asia or down at the scale of the red dot of Singapore. To do this, you have to downscale or increase the resolution of your climate models. And we've done a lot of work on this to try and understand various facets of how climate might change in Singapore. You'll see in this figure a little snapshot of the Malay Peninsula, and you realize that Singapore is even below the resolution of our finest regional models at the moment. This is showing extreme rainfall events, the historic record, and what you can see in green is the global model, and you'll see that this is a frequency versus intensity of rainfall chart, and you can see that the extreme rainfall events are well predicted by the regional model, but are missed by the global model. And then, of course, we can extrapolate forward according to various climate scenarios. So if you take the RCP 8.5, that's business as usual, you can see the regional model predicting even more extreme rainfall events. And this has great resonance today here in Singapore with the flash flooding we've seen recently, and yesterday PUB announcing it's going to spend $500 million more on preparing for flash flooding problems in Singapore. But there are many other things you discover from these models. You can, for example, look at seasonal rainfall and consider what happens under different climate scenarios. And here again, I've picked the Malay Peninsula, and I've shown you the change in rainfall essentially according to the different climate change scenarios. And again, the business as usual in red, extrapolated forward, in green if we address some of the climate change issues in a moderate fashion. And you'll see rainfall decreasing notably in this area in the January to April, in the end of the monsoonal period, and over here in the July-August period. These kind of predictions are kind of instructive both on water resources, because Singapore still gets a lot of its water from reservoirs and rivers in Malaysia. And it also has impacts as you scan around the area on food production elsewhere in Southeast Asia and food security for Singapore. So these studies have great long-term resonance and can be used in the future. We've taken other views of environment around here. In particular, when we first came to Singapore, we realized that some of the largest climate issues related to land use change, in particular the deforestation associated with cutting down of tropical peat forests. And we've spent an enormous amount of work trying to understand what this means. You can see that we've built instrumented test sites. In fact, these are out in Brunei, both in the pristine forests and the deforested areas. And we've made measurements to try and understand the peat forest dynamics, the regeneration and growth of the peat forests. And this work's produced some really rather remarkable results. It's shown us, for example, that all of the peat structures form domes which we can age and date rather precisely from very simple theoretical models. So we know the rate of accumulation, rate of storage of carbon in the peat forests, which of course is a very large driver in global climate change, these forests themselves. It also lets us ask the question, these features are controlled very much by the groundwater table, so we can paint scenarios. If the sea level rises, if rainfall patterns change, if drainage patterns change, we can predict how much of this peat goes away or essentially is available to destroy. In other words, we can watch the growth rates according to different scenarios. And this is now becoming very interesting for Singapore because, of course, peat fires or peatland fires are burning the carbon stored in these domes. And by knowing this, we can figure out what the future work would be to try and predict the impact on this of drainage in the wetlands on mitigation of haze problems from fires, for example. And there's a new intra-create project to do this. We looked at air quality issues, and we've discovered that, in fact, air quality in Singapore, if you aggregate all around the sources, you'll realize the biomass burning, although it's very intense and has created intense haze here in Singapore, is only a fraction of the problem. Air quality in Singapore comes a lot from local sources, and this is a big problem the Singapore government is now having to face. There's a lot more issues here in air quality than meets the eye. We've studied air quality at the micro scale. We've measured air quality of the PM 2.5 intake or exposure of people sitting at bus stops, for example, and discovered that certain lifestyle choices affect the amount of PM 2.5 you ingest. And of course, this has direct public health impacts when you look at respiratory diseases in Singapore. You heard about urban heat island from Peter Edwards this morning. The work we've done in this program has largely been on predictive modeling of urban heat island and trying to understand how various strategies would affect the urban heat island. And this has been a very large part of our activities under Professor Les Norford. And we're part of the team on cooling Singapore. My own work has been at the urban scale, looking at monitoring infrastructures. In particular, we focused on monitoring water networks, drinking water network, driven by the need to control better the loss of water from the water network through leaks and bursts. These are published in the Straits Times regularly when they happen. The technique we used was to embed sensors, wireless sensors, inside the water pipes at strategic locations. This was enabled by our collaborations with PUB. And in fact, it's become a very successful line of business because we started with very small networks in Singapore. And as you can now see, we've deployed this system all around Singapore. So Singapore has a smart water network which monitors the health of the pipe network everywhere in Singapore for the entire population, at least in the drinking water system. I guess the new water system is coming along. We formed a company, Vicente, which has now been bought by a New York stock exchange company, Xylem. So this is another example of technology transfer which has moved along. There's still far more research to be done on this associated with the water quality online detection affecting public health. That's an ongoing area of research. The final snapshot deals with the marine environment, which of course is essential in Singapore, being a small island. One of the most noticeable problems that we've had in the last few years is associated with algal blooms, marine algal blooms, causing fish kills. And to study this problem, we've actually had to bring out quite a range of research to integrate together. We've had to look at the robotics of exploring the marine environment, different kinds of sensors to make the measurements, and we've combined this with marine exploration, also with the marine geophysics and microbiology. Again, this is an area just showing exploration in the Johor Straits, and there's a lot more work needed to understand the toxin pathways that produce these algal blooms. But this is the kind of studies that Sensam's been involved in. And I know I've overrun, but thank you very much to the entire Sensam community. It's been a remarkable 10 years here, and I wanted to thank everyone in the community who's participated in this, and of course the support of NRF. Thank you.
So next, Professor Razin from Share. Go ahead.
I think it's time to change the picture, no? What do you think? Anyhow, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure for me to be here because I remember, how could I remember I'm here 11 years almost, back and forth in Israel, but I remember that about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I heard about the CREATE, what your former president Tony Tan did, and I asked my ambassador, the ambassador of Israel to Singapore, I asked him to arrange a meeting because probably the Hebrew University will have something to suggest. And he arranged a meeting. It was downtown, not here. This campus was not there on that time. And by the end of the meeting, he told me, okay, please submit to us a proposal. What would you like to do? So the proposal or the project that I'm a director of this with Paul McCary is under the Share. It's a company. I'll give you a few words about that. And I'm the director of, with Paul McCary from here, from the National University of Singapore, director of the molecular basis for inflammation. And 6 years after we started with all of that, after Tony Tan asked me to send him a proposal for what I would like to do, your prime minister came to our university and got an honorable doctorate and signed the Share. Now we under Share. We have here the director of Share, Yoel Sasson. Professor Yoel Sasson is here. And it's a little bit changed, but the project is still the same project. What we would like to understand under that is the cellular mechanism of inflammation. Inflammation is a very broad spectrum of topics. It's cover cardiovascular disease, autoimmune, pulmonary, neurological disease, cancer, infectious, etc., etc. And I did it in purpose. I did it because I want to gather people from a broad spectrum of area and to see whether we'll be able to come out with some kind of collaboration with the Singaporean National University of Singapore people and between ourselves. And by the way, it's going very well. I can give you just one topic that I'm in charge of it. I'm here in Singapore because for many years I worked on allergy. Allergy, about 10% of the population suffer from allergy. Allergy is also asthmatic disease and other disease. In Singapore, it's about 12% of the people suffer from allergy, and I'm here because of that. And what we found on 2004 is a new signaling pathway in the main cell in allergic disease. It's called mast cells, and we described it, and we published it on 2004, and that's why I was not recruited. I was asked to come to Singapore and to see whether we can do something. It's called the AP4A, or the lysyl tRNA syntag pathway. Why I'm telling you? Because it's involved in heart hypertrophy. You know, when you are doing exercise, your heart starts to be a little bit bigger. It's involved in heart hypertrophy. And with the people in Singapore and in CREATE, we found that this pathway is some kind of predictable for a disease-free survival of non-small lung carcinoma. We have just published it. And we also found it with collaboration here in melanoma. And of course, now we're working on heart disease and others. We just sort out collaboration with the chairman of pathology here on that one. And of course, there are many other topics in the inflammation that all the people in the project, including the dengue virus, including the dengue virus, Paul McCary, he developed an antibody for that. And that's about that. This is Jerusalem. There are many people that were not in Jerusalem here, or everybody was in Jerusalem? So you know that one? Oh, sorry. You know the wall in the city, and this is Singapore. Thank you so much.
So can I ask the panel to come up here, please? We're now going to you'll be able to ask questions of the panel members, and hopefully they can ask questions of each other. So for this session, we have a bit longer than previous sessions for you to actually ask questions. So please be actually thinking of questions, and if you have a question, just to come to the mic. And I guess there's mic runners too who will bring a mic to you. But just to get it going, I thought I'd ask a question just to get this going, which is that we've heard a lot about the collaboration, and we see the goals for CREATE. How has the scale and scope of CREATE made a difference to the collaboration as you see it? Has it made a difference to you, or is it just something that's actually on paper? So, Professor Wee, I know you thought about this.
Thanks very much, Dan. Well, I guess it makes a big difference from when you're collaborating within Singapore, where we are all about at the very most half an hour's drive from each other, then halfway across the world now. We collaborate quite widely with people in Europe and the US, but it's a very different flavor when you can meet face to face versus when you have to Skype. And even though you see the other guy on the computer screen, it's just still not the same as when you're able to meet face to face. And I think that makes a lot of difference. And as you know, a lot of research actually does not happen in seminar rooms or in the lab. It actually happens in the coffee over Starbucks, over coffee, over a meal, sometimes even over beer. Actually, beer does very good does give up very good conversations. And actually, it's that atmosphere, I think, that really, gives us new idea, new angles to tackle. And I think in that sense, this Create campus with all the facilities and labs and the social places here actually provides for those environment for us to exchange ideas.
Anybody else want to respond to that?
If I understand correctly, your question, see the heterogeneity of the people that are working together, this is the strength of the project.
Yeah, that's the argument, yes.
Because you never know in science, you know better than me probably, you never know what to expect.
That's right.
When you discuss, when you are sitting with people and you're doing, and you discuss things, people that are, for instance, in my area, bioinformatic people, doctors, etc., there are some ideas that are coming up that if you are working with homogeneous population, you can do it.
I was just going to add, I mean, from SMART's perspective, I mean, you're representative of SMART, but I mean, we came here for interdisciplinary research activity, and to do that, you needed a large enough team of people with the different talents. And in fact, that was the logic of building centers of excellence in certain areas so that you could build that interdisciplinary research. And the experience has been really fabulous because we found so many partnerships here in Singapore.
Good.
It's really made a lot of difference to our current research.
Did you have a comment?
For me, I worked in Singapore for 1 year in 2015, and what impressed on me is I think Create program provide a very, very high level of academic research for research scholars in the world. So why I say it is high level? First, I think scholars from the different universities here are conducting the frontier issues of the world. And the second, here I met many high-level professors and scholars. I attended Professor Ong's group's meeting, and I met many postdocs and scholars who do a multidisciplinary subject. And the third, I think this platform have many good hardware, such as good instrument and equipment to help me allowed to do research.
I know Dan's question was about scale, but let me address using two specific examples of how the nature of the partnerships have benefited agencies like NEA. In particular, I mentioned E2S2 earlier, and also how our decisions or infrastructure for Singapore in terms of waste management are based on the conventional measurement technologies. So as we try to push the boundaries as to are there decentralized ways of waste treatment instead, these are very hard for me to push because we cannot build a plant every time or every month. But rather through Shanghai Jiao Tong and your work in Shanghai, this allows us to actually pilot some of these innovations elsewhere, using which I can then convince my own colleagues back here in Singapore. Secondly, just to quote another example, which will be with SMART, with Prof. Harvey's work in Brunei. Sometimes to get some of these instrumentation done is easier from an academic perspective, as opposed to a G2G effort, which, as you can imagine, could be quite sensitive.
Okay, so let's open it up to questions. There's a question right here.
Thank you. I'm Philip Shapiro from University of Manchester and Georgia Tech. To be a little bit provocative, I know it's meant to be a celebration and we're all supposed to hear the good things. But, you know, in the spirit of learning, I'm just wondering about things that don't work really so well in Create. What might be some failures? And I wonder, and this might be something you're really only going to tell me when we're in the bar, because we're in a public environment. But I'm just wondering, from the view of the international research researchers, what are some of the things that really don't quite work that could be improved? And I wonder from the view of the Singaporean colleagues, the same question. So I've thrown that one to you, and I'll be interested in your response.
Who would like to take that?
You're right. I mean, a lot of the efforts that we make a start, but it goes nowhere. And I guess even in Singapore, we're still over this few 15 years or so, where with the focus on biomedical research. Initially, you start off with us wanting to do everything, and because it's everyone is a bottom-up kind of an approach, so you fund the most interesting proposals, and these could be as diverse as anything as possible. But it also becomes very clear that sometimes we are more competitive in some areas than others. So actually, I was going to add to Dan's earlier question that when SMART set up the infectious disease group, dengue was not a focus. It actually became a focus later on. One of the first 4 diseases that the team decided to work on was actually a respiratory syncytial virus, which affects young children. But RSV is very common throughout the whole world, and very common, especially during the winter months in Europe and in North America. So there's actually very little competitive advantage in Singapore. Whereas dengue is distributed throughout the tropical world, but not many places in the tropical world has the technology that Singapore has. So it becomes very obvious where we should focus the technological effort. But it took some time and really literally in conversations over lunch and over at the bars for that to really come about. And very soon after that was realized, the team dropped RSV from research and took on dengue. And so sometimes it's not so much the logistics or the complexity of research, is sometimes choosing the right question given the environment and the circumstances that we live in.
Well, I'm not sure where to tackle this, but I feel obliged to say something. Over the years, there are many, many positives to working here in Singapore, and I think we should start with that. Dealing on the environmental issues, the urban issues, access to a lot of data held by government agencies is a big challenge. And despite very best intentions, I think, from the top down of the Singaporean government, transparency of data is not, or access to data is not an easy issue. So trying to persuade people to share data is a big challenge here. And I don't know that it's unusual, but it comes with Singapore Inc. by having a very large bureaucracy or a large government service, large civil service. There are many positives, of course, that come with working with these technically proficient agencies of the Singaporean government. But one element that they also struggle with a bit, I think, is their role in the innovation economy. And we've come across quite a number of instances where agencies want ownership of IP, which is counterproductive to the innovation economy that Singapore is trying to grow. And so these are 2 issues that are sort of pervasive issues, and I would say they've come and gone over the 10 years we've been here. We've seen moments of great clarity when things have been provided, and other moments of great frustration. And I don't know that's unusual to Singapore, but those are 2 in particular that are generic to many of the programs in CREATE dealing with these kind of public agencies.
So now as a sole representative from the government, I feel compelled to respond. So on data, I think we'll be first to admit that more can be done. I'll put it, this is unofficial, off the record. But yes, and all the cameras. But I put it down that initial phase, because I was in the IFCOM Development Authority, where we look at digitalization of Singapore and using open data and putting on data.gov.sg, for instance. I will admit that there was an element of agencies checking the boxes, putting out data sets after data sets for just to be seen as having done so, having exposed data. But I recall the very early days where a lot of these were in PDFs, they were not machine readable. So there was then an effort to make this machine readable and so on. And now there's an attempt to also put different resolutions of data For example, my colleagues at the Meteorological Services of Singapore do expose our weather data, but as you can imagine, there are different resolutions that are possible, and we can't possibly host all of that in one database. So rather, we have a stock set that's available, but we provide custom services. As for the use or the assertion of rights of IP, maybe there are other agencies with different policies, but there will be some upcoming changes. You'll hear an announcement very soon by IPI Singapore, and IPOS as well in January, where there'll be a new national framework for IP. Essentially, what agencies want, like ourselves, is the ability to use the IP, not to own it, for the benefit of companies. For example, one of the things I didn't talk about today was our interest in using robotics, right? Because a lot of what NEA does, actually through our companies, the use of trucks and so on to do waste haulage. But even if NEA is the one that invests in, let's say, MIT to do the research, and assuming the IP bears fruit, the key is how do we then get the companies that provide the services to NEA to actually do something with the IP. So our key interest is to make sure that the IP can flow to those companies, yeah, but not owning it for its own sake. Yeah.
Any other comments?
Just to say that here in this very interesting day, and I'm hearing it from my colleagues, what is coming out from this research? Do you have patents? Do you have a startup? Do you have all of that? We could measure this by 5 or 6 years. We have to wait. Something will come out, but we need patience.
All right. Do you wish to make any comments? You don't have to.
Okay, I think for me, I focus on the environment. I think for the environmental problem, it is not a problem for one country, or it is the problem of the region of the world. So it needs the international cooperation of different countries. So CREATE program gave us the opportunity to do the common efforts for the environment.
So, any other questions? The audience is silent.
Maybe a question to Patrick. Cambridge has now been here for 4 years, and it was a tremendous experience. I really love it, okay, and there are a number of reasons for it. You, as a representative of Singapore agency, how would you like to see the CREATE institutions to develop, and what would make it easier for you to, say, make these data sets available, or to just engage, right? How can we communicate better? What do you think?
It's a good question. In fact, I was in NRF in my previous job, so we have this issue that we have been grappling with all this while. I think what we can do moving forward is more concerted workshops, for example, around a certain theme like, let's say, environmental problems or human health issues, get the PIs from the so-called supply side of R&D, along with the agencies concerned. Actually, a lot of issues I face internally is that I have to be like the bridge to convince the partners or colleagues or other agencies as to why is this a problem that is worth solving, and for them to avail the data of the R&D community. So I think both sides need to have more avenues to talk. It's little bit regrettable today that the audience is very much still on the R&D side, and not enough agencies are in our midst. But I think it's a good start. It's better than nothing. But moving forward, I think we have kind of more use-driven workshops around certain themes.
Just one more remark. One more remark. This morning, we learned that industry sent employees into universities' research labs to work with the researcher. Maybe that would be a step forward for government agencies if, you know, they don't have to spend months, okay? But maybe if somebody from NEA or NCCS or EDB, okay, could spend maybe a week in our labs working there, that'd be really good, okay? Because through that we could establish a bit more trust, and also sometimes we just don't understand how the agencies work. And just to make that clear, I don't think this is a Singaporean problem. I can tell you in England, it is not much easier, okay? So it hasn't, I don't think that this is a Singaporean specific problem. But I think seconding maybe a member from an agency to work with us together for a week or so, that would be really good.
So that's a very good question. Let me ask the colleagues here on the stage, you know, looking at it from the same perspective as Marcus did. How can we work better with the agencies like NEA, but any other agency? Ideas?
Working with the agency.
No, better. Assuming you can always improve, right?
I think for researchers, we can provide some standard, such as we detected many emerging contaminants in the environment, but now there are not standard in the supplying water system. So after we detected the concentration of emerging contaminants in the water, we can tell the agency what the concentration is appropriate to discharge into the environment. So give agencies some solutions to manage.
Right, solutions. Okay. Any other ideas?
We've had various forms of collaboration.
Yes.
I mean, on the climate change research, in fact, we were involved in education programs initially with NEA, with the Centre for Climate Research. So there were issues where agencies were building their own research capability, and that was a big opportunity to collaborate. Other agencies, of course, do a lot of in-house research, and it's more the other way around. It's more a matter of sharing with the agencies or having them come and spend time with us. I think Marcus made a great point, actually.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well, let me add to that. Actually, from the agency perspective, we are trying to be part of the solution as well. So recently, for example, Lian Wing, Kiang Wei and I, we had a multi-agency meeting held around doing a stock take of air quality R&D. Andrew is right in that the civil service is quite large today. If you do a count, there are some, just under 100 agencies, including ministries and stat boards. 100? Compared to my childhood, there were probably about 20 ministries, I recall. I think this is a function of the degree of specialization, right? So that applies to the R&D side, but also to government. So even taking the issue of emerging contaminants, that is the domain of not just NEA, but other agencies like Singapore Customs, in terms of when you talk about imports of goods and services or materials. So even the issue of ECs will straddle quite a few agencies. Or take another example would be noise, right? NEA looks at it from a construction noise point of view. HDB looks at it from the municipal nuisance point of view. How do you design homes better? So if you take any issue, there are easily 6 blind men or more looking at the same elephant. So the issue is how do we bring them together more often? And also while we do that, pull in the R&D community with us.
I mean, could Create serve as kind of a nucleating function to do that cross-cut?
Sure, we'll love that. Yeah.
There we are. There's a specific thing we can do. That's a value, right? Okay, I think we're almost out of time. Let me ask if there's any final questions from the audience. Well, in that case, let's thank the panel. Thank you very much.